really do.
Yeah, say very strong pairing, and as I said, Little John quick and consistent yesterday, but the sheer speed of the Spider down the straights was just allowing him to struggle, and he just couldn't get that position. So interested to see what he can do from the start today. Obviously he's got a number of quick cars and good drivers behind him. Jamie Winslow on his left hand side, so it'll be very interesting to that first corner. It's going to be crucial that he keeps that first position.
Absolutely, and what we saw yesterday was Ross Kaiser starting from pole position, and he got absolutely swamped by the Spiders by the time they reached the Rettifilio.
Yeah, it's certainly, because it's such a long straight and the start line's sort of halfway up the straight, you've still got a significant amount of space. So if the Spiders can get the power down, as you say, they just accelerate that bit quicker. So certainly going to be interesting to watch.
There you can see through the Rettifilio almost the worst possible conditions for these drivers. It's no question you want tires, but you've only got the width of the racing line before it starts to get very slippery.
Yes, certainly. Say most of the drivers, if not all, definitely be out on slicks now, even though it is declared a wet race. The cars are phenomenally good in the wet, but in these conditions, it really just creates a slippy surface. So a lot of weaving going on in the background. You can see a few people were doing some burnouts off the line just to get as much heat into those tyres, because it's going to take a couple more laps than it did yesterday to get those tyres working.
They're going to have to be very sensible in the opening stages. Here's the second chicane, and again, just looking for the racing line, it is dry, and crucially it's dry-ish through the tunnel into the first Lesmo, which is where between the trees you'd expect it to be. I mean, it's still pretty damp there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was watching this morning from qualifying just on before Ascari. I'm expecting it's going to be quite damp there, which again is the struggle there is going to be the big braking zone into Ascari. The tyres will cool down significantly and be slightly damp, so drivers are going to have to really watch out on their braking points today.
They certainly will be, and this is where you've got to have, in the words of Mario Andretti, a very educated right foot.
Yes, certainly. And again, it may be something that we see the professionals just trumping the less experienced drop they're on. But the smallest mistake, as we saw yesterday, can change the grid completely.
So it's James Robinson there in the pit. So here is that run into Ascari to which you're alluding. And yeah, just in the braking zone, we've had the big powerful V8 3.5s out a few moments ago. So they've done something to clear a dry line, but very easy. If you're slightly offline, that could cause you all sorts of bother. Although they would be an illustrious company, because I remember Gerhard Berger back in 1993 losing the Ferrari there, warming up the Italian Grand Prix in similar conditions. And then they come through Ascari and then the long blast towards the Parabolica. But this should be an awful lot of fun, because yesterday's race was absolutely fascinating, and today with a different profile of the success seconds, it's not going to be maybe quite as easy for Jamie Constable and Mike Cantillon to gap the field through the pit stops.
No, I was just chatting to a very excitable Mike Cantillon before the races. He was suiting up, and he was going over all the tactics in his head, trying to work out what he needs to do, and I think he's going to be focusing on just trying to maintain the gap between the guys in front, Little John and Winslow, who, as we know, are very well seasoned and quick drivers. So he knows what he's got to do. He had a few mistakes yesterday, which cost him arguably a chance to fight for the win, so he's going to be really keen to get it right today.
The start is going to be absolutely fascinating, because for James Littlejohn, he knows that any chance of leading this race through to the pit stops is going to come if he can keep James Winslow behind him into the Rettifilio for the first time, because we saw the SR8 struggling to get past the Spiders yesterday. We're about to go racing them for the second time this weekend in the Radical European Masters here at Monza. What more could you want than this, as we wait for the lights to change as the field bunch down onto the start and finish stretch. There's the red light, out it goes, and we're racing once more, and Little John's anticipated that well, but here comes Mike Cantillon and James Winslow. Certainly Winslow's going to get his nose in front of Little John, and Cantillon as well darts through into second place. Jamie Constable and Jim Booth a little bit more boxed in behind. This is going to be tight into the Rettifilio, as Little John able to break deeper, so he reclaims second position. Cantillon is third, Alos is fourth, contact behind, and I think that was John Caldwell who lost out in that. Not his fault, as Maritiotto rubs bodywork with Jack Manchester as they head into Curva Grande. They're still going at each other, and finally Maritiotto gets his nose in front.
Yeah, great start. I think Cantillon very probably sensible on the brakes there after yesterday, so potentially could hold that place, but better to keep that and try and get past Little John. So Winslow is going to pull away inevitably here, so it's important for Little John just to keep the other guys at bay. But he's got Manhal Alos, who we know has performed very well in the SR8 this year, behind, so he needs to make sure he doesn't close that gap too much to him.
Aggressive driving as well from Jamie Constable to get clear of Alain Costa, who's also been now passed by Jeremy Ferguson and Jim Booth. And then in the Supersport class, Yanni Herpier showing strongly early on as Winslow trying to stretch his legs and pull clear of James Littlejohn. Now this is intriguing for Winslow because he and John Corbett are a very strong pairing. John's shown great pace this year in the Spider, so Winslow doing what he can to maybe give John the chance to take the victory. Meanwhile, Constable chasing down Manhal Alos as they accelerate towards the Parabolica. Littlejohn likewise under a little bit of pressure from Mike Cantillon.
Yeah, it's going to work in Winslow's favour here, as you see, because Mike Cantillon fighting James Littlejohn's going to slow that pair down. So that's going to allow Winslow to create a gap before the pit stop. So for Cantillon, it's crucial that he gets past Littlejohn as soon as he can to try and close that gap down.
And now Cantillon looks to line up the move on Littlejohn's. He draws alongside down the start and finish straight. Jamie Constable, who was the quickest of the Spiders yesterday en route to the race win, also thinking about having a little bite at Littlejohn's advantage. And Cantillon squares off the apex exactly as he needs to. That's nice driving from Mike Cantillon.
Yeah, very, very good from Cantillon. Great on the brakes there. It's getting that mixture between braking as late as possible, but not running off over that chicane. So he did that very well, and that's going to allow him just to pull a small gap as Constable comes up to the back of Littlejohn to try and do the same thing.
We've got a drive-through penalty, though, for Jeremy Ferguson for working after the 2-minute board was shown as Littlejohn has to cover the inside line to keep Jamie Constable behind him as they accelerate on towards the first of the Lesmos. So where Littlejohn can use the aerodynamics of the SR8, rely on that grip and then punch through to the second Lesmo. Always an exhilarating section of the circuit. It's really a narrow tunnel through the trees, particularly the sprint towards Ascari. Now this is Yanni Herpier and Marcello Maratiotto. And Marcello in feisty mood this morning.
So we've seen some aggressive driving in the Superport series this morning. So it's, as we know, it's been close all year, and there's a lot of good guys out there. Here comes Constable down the inside. Doesn't quite have enough to make it stick.
It's optimistic from Jamie Constable. It shows how confident he is in the handling of the car. Alain Costa, another of the SR8s, he's been shuffled towards the tail of the Masters class as Constable doesn't quite get the propulsion out of Ascari to threaten Littlejohn on the straight. Instead, he looks to the inside of the Parabolica and goes for the move. He's going to wiggle out wide here, Jamie Constable. Oh, and he's into the gravel as well, and that's going to cost him a whole heap of time. He keeps his foot in. Oh, he's almost spinning into the path of the traffic, and I really hope that everybody sees him, because that is a very precarious place to be parked for Jamie Constable. And here they come. Oh, that's incredibly close. They scatter one side and then the other as Constable looks to get the car fired up and back up to speed.
Yeah, I imagine he's just having trouble getting the car restarted there. Obviously, with the spin, he would have stalled it. So very on the edge there. In hindsight, he should have just waited to get to that main straight, because he's definitely cost himself a few places there. He'll be kicking himself on that one. It
was just a little bit of impetuosity, wasn't it? Because if he just waited through the Parabolica, he could have had James Littlejohn by the time they got towards the Rettifilio.
Yeah, trouble there, Ben. As I say, it's damp track still, so as soon as he was off that racing line, it pulled him wide. Damp, cold track, sucked him out into the gravel, and as I say, tried to keep it going and just lost it. So small error there.
Well, he's back underway and has come across the line in 15th position, but he's lost the best part of 30 seconds rather, with that moment. I'm just very glad that nobody came barreling in unsighted and collected him.
Yeah, it's a little bit precarious for a minute there, but fortunately double wave yellow straight out from the marshals, so everyone would have clocked that and just managed to avoid that. So,
well, this is the front of the Supersport class we're currently watching now. The bright red car is Bradley Ellis. He's got Stuart Mosley just behind him. So two of the professional drivers in the Supersport class going wheel to wheel. As Manhal Alos has got Jeremy Ferguson behind him, but Manhal, I'm sure, will be aware that Jeremy has got to serve a drive-through penalty in the next couple of laps.
Yeah, obviously two drivers, different cars, both running overall motorsport, so shows some respect. But as you say, Ferguson within the next 2 laps is going to have to come in and serve that penalty.
He, not unsurprisingly, thinks better of launching it to the inside at the Parabolica this time around.
Keeps it sensible, yeah.
And also it's just that painted section of the track to the edge as well. You join onto that, you're going to be sucked out towards the gravel trap. So here is the drive-through penalty for Jeremy Ferguson. The first task is not to then pick up a drive-through penalty for pit lane speeding.
Yeah, you tend to find a lot of the drivers a little bit frustrated and hot under the collar through the drive-throughs. It's very, very important that they just keep that speed down and obey the speed limit in there to avoid any further penalties, as you say.
Now Jim Booth is going to be taking his turn to apply the pressure to Manhal Alos. We are just over 6 minutes into the race. James Winslow leads from Mike Cantillon and James Littlejohn. Then it's Alos in 4th, Jim Booth in 5th. That's the fight we're watching. Jeremy Ferguson is down to 7th behind Alan Costa. And then in the Supersport class, it's led by Bradley Ellis from Stuart Mosley and Peter Padden. Jamie Constable has already recovered up into 11th position. And he'll make fairly short work of the Supersport class cars just because of the outright speed differential. But then we'll have to really work pretty hard to recover beyond there.
Crucially for Mike Cantillon, keeping that gap nice. It's currently just under 4-second gap. I believe, if I'm right, that there's a 20-second penalty for Winslow in the pit stops.
Now that was Austin Kinsella looking to the inside of Yanni Herpia. He made the move stick for 13th position. Yeah, what we're alluding to is the success seconds, which are awarded for the drivers who finish in the top positions in each class in the preceding races. And so that is felt to be a much more preferable approach to, say, success ballast, which can really alter the way that the car performs. Whereas success seconds, you've got that equalisation, but you can get the car working exactly as you want it to.
Yes, certainly. I say keeps the cars even and fair on track. It means that every single race is different. Lots of other series doing very similar things. We see touring cars doing ballast and reverse grids and things. So it seems to be a very fair way and certainly makes for some interesting racing.
Of course, we would in no way wish to insinuate the British Touring Car Championship regulations were such that it always went to the title decider, as the battle between Manhat Alos and Jim Booth runs down towards the Rettifilio. This is the fight for 4th and 5th. So looking at the success seconds situation then, James Winslow has got no success seconds in the car that he is in with John Corbett, whereas Mike Cantillon has got 20 success seconds.
I was the other way around to what I was thinking then, yeah. So for Cantillon, still important to keep that gap, which I see has grown just to 4.5 seconds. So, but as you say, Corbett, a very strong driver and did a good performance yesterday. So his pace is going to be very good. So it's going to be hard for Mike to capitalise out of that one, I think.
That said, Mike Cantillon is currently the quickest car in the race altogether through the first sector, as Littlejohn in 3rd. He's got Tony Wells and to take over at the pit stops, and the 25 additional stationary seconds as a result of the phenomenal season that they have enjoyed so far. Manhal Alos also 25 seconds, and then Jim Booth 10 seconds. So potentially for James Winslow and John Corbett, this is looking quite nice, but there is a long way to go. And of course, we saw yesterday with John Corbett, there were those slightly strange issues which were causing the car to slow late on.
Yeah, I did speak to technical guys, and it seems to have a few issues, I think down to some electronic issues. So it didn't completely affect his race, but he did lose a little bit of time through that. So hopefully with the guys working on the car overnight, that's going to be good, reliable, and give them a chance to really fight for this one.
So 3 leaders still only separated by some 3.5 seconds. And this is, I'd imagine, very smart driving from James Winslow, because he knows that if he's out front and that Mike Cantillon is going to be in the pits for a little bit longer, all things being equal, he doesn't need to push any harder than this and can conserve the tyres and leave the car in very good condition for John Corbett to inherit.
Yeah, there's an important point that you make there. Obviously, with the professional drivers, it's very easy for them to push the cars to the limits. That's what they're used to doing. But they have got a driver slightly less experienced hopping in the car for the second stage. It's always difficult getting in for the second stage of the car because it's warmer, it's been out, you're not quite in the race zone. So for Jamie, it's about saving those tyres to give John Corbett the best opportunity he can when he hops in that car.
So they turn through the second Lesmo, sprint on towards Ascari. Road running downhill under the banking, and then just up the slight rise into the braking zone at Ascari in the Supersport class. Stuart Mosley is now ahead of Bradley Ellis and leads that class from Ellis, and then Peter Padden, Marcello Maracciotto, Yanni Herpia, Jack Manchester, John Caldwell Konstantin Gurkaev, and into the pit lane, unfortunately, has come Austin Kinsella.
Yeah, interesting what's going on. I know they had to do an engine change last night on that car, but everything was tested fine. So I wonder if there's a couple of installation issues or something else there, but hopefully we'll find out shortly on that one.
Now, Jamie Constable is now back up into 7th position. There is the debrief with Austin Kinsella, the rear of the car coming off, and it might be, because Austin is an experienced driver, that rather than risk damaging the engine, they're going to use this race as an extended test session, then push on in the final race, which comes later on today.
Yeah, certainly. You see the guys like Austin who've driven cars for so long, a lot of knowledge, and they know how the car should feel. So any doubt, he'll be coming in and, like I say, getting some checks. So hopefully there's nothing fatal for that car, so they can get straight back out in this race, but we will see. And
we've got a drive-through penalty as Jim Booth attempts and succeeds in getting past Matt Hals. A drive-through penalty for Marcello Maracchiotto for causing a collision as Alos draws alongside Jim Booth as they head towards the Curva Grande. It's dry enough here to go side by side, and so that is decided in favour of Jim Booth. I think for Maracchiotto, that was probably that contact with Yanni Herpia that we saw.
Yeah, I think as we said earlier, he's driving very aggressively at the start, which great to watch, but maybe just pushed the limit there, so that's going to hinder his race, certainly.
Well, one of the lovely things about the Monza race weekend is that all the drivers who live within a reasonable distance of the circuit, all of their friends and relatives in each and every class come to watch, and it gives a great buzz in the paddock, but it also does put a little bit of pressure on a top home performance.
Yeah, definitely. It's, as I say, lots of friends and family here, and actually there's quite a big turnout from the public here, so being Italian, they do love their cars and motorsport, so it's great to see a bit of a crowd out there.
Yeah, well, I should say that the car park behind the main grandstand, upon the top of which we're perched, is absolutely packed today, so it's great to see a lot of people here to enjoy a rich package of European motorsport this weekend as Little John picks up the pace through Parabolica, and that's the mark of professional drive there from James Littlejohn, millimetres away from the painted surface, but he kept it on the right side, and then he went over the curb where he knew he could.
Yeah, certainly using all the track available, and as you say, because it's damp, just avoiding those white lines, get a rear wheel onto those, and very, very easy to spin, which none of these guys want to do, obviously.
Yeah, as Cantillon just to the exit of the curbs as well, coming through the chicane. Now he's getting a little bit closer here to James Winslow.
I was going to say the gaps last time round dropped under a second, so I wonder if Winslow had a slight issue and lost it under braking, because that gap's really closed down.
Another gap that's closed down is Alain Costa, who came very close there to tapping into the side of Manhal Alos. And I know you were saying on the grid that Manhal's a little bit worried about that all was as it should be with that car, but he has slipped a little bit through the field. Now that might be that he was right in thinking that all isn't as it ought to be, but also because it was declared a wet race, what we might well see is some drivers, they've gone with slick tyres, but actually a heavier downforce setup, which is now starting to hurt them.
Yeah, an interesting thing, because it was declared wet, and obviously you have free choice then over tyres, it meant that if the rain had come down on the grid, that the race organisers would not be obliged to let the teams change, so they would have had to come in after the first lap for a pit stop, which was in a very busy pit lane. So as a result of that, as you say, they may be on a slightly different setup, and as that track's drying out, because the car will be set up slightly softer in case of the wet race, they'll be slightly struggling with handling that car, which on the SR8, as we know, is quite a fine-tuned car, will probably affect slightly more than the Spider, which is a little bit better balanced.
Because I think something you maybe don't, that's quite difficult to appreciate, is that the way you get the car working in the wet or damp weather is so different to in the dry, that it isn't a case of simply as it dries out you can push harder and go faster, because you've got so many different elements on the car adjusted to work for different weather conditions.
Yes, certainly, and everything from the dampers to the roll bars, angles, cambers for the tyres, even looking at the rear wing, just moving the rear wing a few millimetres up or down has a huge effect. As you say, you don't want a car set up complete dry if it's going to be a wet race, and vice versa, so it's very tricky to get that right, and something that probably professionals find slightly easier to deal with than the slightly less experienced drivers. But that being said, we've seen a few issues, haven't we, today? So
and that's sideways from Manhal Alos, as he was possibly just a little bit premature with the throttle, so he went through the right-hander But Alain Costa not quite close enough to pounce. We're on to the 9th lap of the race. We're just over 1/4 race distance. James Winslow leads as he has done throughout. Mike Cantillon is in 2nd place. James Littlejohn in 3rd. Jim Booth, the blue car, you can see him 4th. Then this is the battle for 5th and 6th between Alos and Costa. They have got Jamie Constable catching them at a rate of 4 seconds a lap in 7th. Then it's Jeremy Ferguson in 8th. Stuart Mosley leads the Supersport class in 9th from Bradley Ellis and Peter Paddon.
You can see there's certainly a more defined dry line developed on the circuit, so which is good for the drivers in terms of picking up pace, but anyone making an overtake is going to be very cautious.
Konstantin Gudkayev goes a lap down to the race leaders, and the reason for that is that the Supersport class cars have got the most unbelievable handling and turning abilities, but necessarily they're not quite as quick in the straight lines as the Masters class cars, and this is one of the circuits where power is at a premium, where you do see a really marked differential between the two classes. Gudkayev currently in 16th place, and the next target here for James Winslow is John Caldwell, and this is when it starts to open the door to Mike Cantillon.
Yeah, certainly it's very tricky. Mike's got to stay as close as he can and try and go with them on each overtake so they don't get split up. But similarly, Jamie's got to be very careful that he doesn't leave the gap open for Mike, who's having a fantastic race and sticking very close to the back of him. So he's doing a great job, Mike. As we say, he's a very experienced driver. Not done loads of radicals recently, but he's dipped in a few races this year and showing great performance.
There is John Caldwell, who decides that he's going to take his racing line, as he is perfectly entitled to, through the chicane, because what the drivers will be told in the driver's briefing is if you're being lapped, stick to the racing line, don't move offline, because that will potentially confuse those behind you. Just be consistent, let the quicker cars find a way around, and that's precisely what John Caldwell has done. It's ever so slightly advantaged James Winslow, but not an awful lot in it.
Yeah, the two drivers are just getting split with John Caldwell, which is what Mike was probably trying to avoid, but shouldn't have lost too much time there. Just come down under the bridge into Ascari. So Mike's maintained that gap very well. So fantastic performance from Mike today, I think. He's going to be very pleased with keeping up with Jamie like that. Yeah,
he just seems to... Certainly when we saw him in Paul Ricard, it looked like he'd found a sweet spot with the setup of the car, and that's continued here into Monza. And Winslow, if he's got anything more to dip into here, he's going to have to find it pretty quickly. What this also is doing is laying down a marker for John Corbett, which is saying, unless you can be in the 1 minute 48 second bracket, I'm going to be coming after you in the second phase of the race.
Yes, certainly, and although obviously James Winslow carries slightly more fuel than Corbett will have, you would expect Corbett to be slightly slower than Winslow when he hopped in, so this could be an opportunity for Mike. If he can keep this pace up, have a good pit stop and get back out, but obviously he is going to be slightly behind with those success sessions in the pit stop.
Yeah, I think he probably will be, as they have got, I think that's Jack Manchester to put the lap onto. Manchester sees them coming, and the two Spiders swoop around the outside the Curva Grande. Of course, lots of speculation. That section of the circuit's going to be remodelled in fairly short order, as Cantillon considers challenging Winslow. Now, we are only 5 minutes or so away, about 3 laps from the pit window opening, and the question here for Mike Cantillon is, does he come in early and see if he can go quicker in some clear air, or is he in fact being paced very nicely here by James Winslow and just wants to stick with him for as long as possible?
Yes, certainly. Not sure which way he's going to go on this one. I'd imagine he may try and dip in early, but at the same time, by him being so close to James Winslow, it stops Winslow having that opportunity to pull away, because he's having to slightly defend into every braking zone, so maybe to Mike's advantage to stay out as long as possible.
Yanni Herpy, the next target. They'll probably they will pass him coming out of Ascari, and certainly something that can be very beneficial as a driver is if you're behind somebody who might on a clear track be about half a second a lap quicker than you, to follow them lap upon lap, you learn so much about just some extra tricks around the track and just taking the benefit of being able to follow what they're doing.
It definitely allows you to completely follow their line, copy their braking zones, and for someone like Mike, very intelligent racer, he'll be watching everything Jamie does and making sure that he can learn from that and keep as close as possible. So he hasn't slipped off the back of him for a good sort of 4 or 5 laps now.
Because these drivers will be mentally well ahead of what the car's doing. They'll be thinking several corners ahead. They might be plotting a move several laps out. As Cantillon now thinks about lining up a challenge to the inside at the Rettifilio. After yesterday's spin there, he knows better than to just launch to the inside line. and this isn't something he necessarily needs to force. It's really going to come down to his pace relative to that of John Corbett's in the second half of the race. Winslow we'd expect to see staying out until fairly deep in the pit window, so it'll be about 25 minutes or thereabouts on track for John Corbett.
Yeah, I think what it does show us, though, with Mike lapping mid 148s at the moment, I'd imagine we're going to see him bring that lap time down if he gets a bit of clear track after pit stop. So interested to see what sort of lap time he's capable of round here today.
Now, the other strategic dimension here is the car they're about to lap at Peter Paddon. James Winslow is due to drive that car in the second half of the race. So there's got to be a degree of synchronisation on the pit stops.
Yeah, unusually James Winslow hopping into two cars. We saw him do very well on SR3 yesterday. So a friend of both those drivers. So yeah, they're getting the money out of him this weekend. So
there is a possibility here, as tantalising as it is, that James Winslow could actually win both races in a single effort here.
Which isn't bad for a day's work.
It certainly isn't, as he follows behind Peter Paddon. Obviously, he's not going to look to clip Paddon or anything like that because he's got to get in that car in 10 minutes' time. But he takes advantage of a little bit of tow down the back straight towards the Parabolica. Paddon slots in behind him and Cantillon. Cantillon has another little bit of a look to the inside line at the Parabolica. And Winslow a little bit tight there through the Parabolica, and this is the opportunity for Cantillon to wind up the move and draw. Oh, well held Mike Cantillon as he just got onto the damp curb on the edge of the Parabolica, and that was very nearly going to give the spare parts department a very busy Monday.
Yeah, exactly what we were saying earlier, just squeezing that onto that wet curb and white line, and fantastic driving from Mike. The phenomenal speed that he'd been carried then just to hold that, and actually he's managed to keep that gap maintained. So unfortunately couldn't make the move stick against Winslow, but here we are again. Fantastic control there of the car.
And that is the precise moment where a new world record was set for the highest ever recorded blood pressure, about then, as Cantillon just kept his foot in, didn't overreact with the steering, and he's there still behind James Winslow.
There's great effort from him, and it's the pure fact that he's sticking so close to him. Any little mistake Winslow makes gives him that opportunity. So unfortunately, they're just slightly wide for him, but well defended Winslow as well.
Through the first of the Lesmos, and still Cantillon sticking right behind James Winslow. The pit window, they will see the pit lane open board at the end of the lap after this one. And just to clarify, if you're new to the Radical European Masters, that in order to equalise the teams that may or may not have pit-to-car radio, the drivers have to go past the pit lane open board before they can come in and make their pit stop. So through Ascari again, as Mike Cantillon settles in behind James Winslow. James Littlejohn in third place still, Jim Booth in fourth, Alan Costa remains in fifth from Manhal Alos and Jamie Constable, but Constable likely to get past Alos on this lap, and then Stuart Mosley still the leader of the Supersport class from Bradley Ellis and Peter Paddon.
Who've not seen much of James Littlejohn since the start, but he managed to keep that gap fairly tight to the two spiders, but just not able to replicate that sheer pace he had in qualifying against these cars during the race conditions.
Barrelling along the start and finish straight towards the Rettifilio. Cantillon just a little bit further back from Winslow, but he's been within 3/4 of a second of James Winslow for several laps now. And something that's been striking about, again, the way they've got the spiders working this weekend is that they don't seem to be that affected by the turbulent air from the car in front. They're able to follow very close to the car in front and still maintain the performance through the race.
Yeah, which is something you see a lot in the Formula One, is that the cars will get in the tow, as we're seeing here with these two drivers, but after one or two laps of trying, they'll have to back off to, I say, get the most out of the aerodynamics, cool the tyres down, get enough airflow through the engine. But these cars, say, very good at dealing with that and don't get too affected, so it means that we can have some very close racing, which is fantastic for the guys on track and for us as viewers.
Well, Jim Booth and Alan Costa are still pretty much as they were. They're going to have Jamie Constable homing on them fairly quickly. Now there is a problem for Jeremy Ferguson.
Contact on the left hand side, you can see the rear louver up there, and you can see a load of grass in his front rad, so he's got to be slightly careful here because the complete front end has been blocked for air.
Oh, so he's done the rear suspension as well, hasn't he? The rear left wheel is pointing in all sorts of the wrong angle, and here is another look at it. That's a fair old clip to be going off Ascari, and I suspect he bumps back onto the track. That's what's done the suspension. Yeah,
a lot of speed carried through the range, say, and very, very bumpy. So fortunately, we'll be able to get into pits. So I don't think we're going to see him back in this race all that damage. At least managed to bring it home. Just, I say, just needs to be careful not to cook the engine there, because all that grass covering the rads is not going to help for air getting to the engine.
So he's into the pit lane. The pit window is now open. They go past the pit lane open board. So it's going to be at the end of this lap where we'll start to see the strategic elements of the race kicking in just at the point, in fact, as Bradley Ellis is being caught here by the race leaders. But again, with the speed differential, it should be fairly straightforward.
Yeah, you see Cantillon obviously just backed off to get that gap to around a second, which he may have been on the radio with the team, just to back off and save his tyres a little bit so that he doesn't ruin the second half of his race. So some great driving from Mike. He's managed to keep that gap. Had a few looks down the inside of Winslow, but probably sensible now just to maintain that gap into the pit stop and see what he can do in the second stage of this race.
Yeah, he's still within about a second of James Winslow, but just to clarify, James Winslow and John Corbett's pit stop is, because of success seconds, going to be 20 seconds shorter than that for Mike Cantillon. So Cantillon's going to have to do a fair amount of chasing on John Corbett. Jeremy Ferguson, meanwhile, jumps out of the car, and the Raw Racing team can have a fair amount of work to do to get that out for the third and final race of the weekend a little bit later on.
Yep, fortunately we've got a bit of a gap between the next race, so there should be no problem getting that car sorted, ready for the brothers who I guess will be sharing race 3 together.
Yeah, although Andrew Ferguson might just be saying, I'll start that one, thank you, Jeremy, if you don't mind.
Yeah, especially after that incident.
So the race leaders on for the 15th time of asking into the parabolic, and Mike Cantillon remains James Winslow's ever-present shadow. Now, is Winslow going to duck in early? Because, of course, we know he has to hand over to Peter Padd, and that's exactly what happens. So in comes the race leader, James Winslow, to pass over to John Corbett. It releases Mike Cantillon to some clear air. Now, Cantillon's best lap behind James Winslow was the fastest lap of the race, so 1 minute 48.673. Let's see what he can do now he's got the track to himself.
Yeah, imagine now, as you say, because Jamie's come in, gives Mike an opportunity just to get a couple laps in, get that gap as much as he can whilst these guys are in the pit stop. So let's see what lap times he puts in.
So a top up of fuel, 2 Bowser's worth to go in. So clearly a thirsty circuit here at Monza, as we hypothesised it might be, with Cantillon out on the far side of the circuit. It promotes James Littlejohn up into second position. Others that are in the pits, Marcello Marchiotto is in to hand over to Marco Cenchetti. No particular surprise there. Let's see what Cenchetti can do scything through the Supersport class in the second phase of the race. Now, Cantillon had a good first sector, a 34.1. Also in his Manhal Alos to pass over to Ross Kaiser. Alos out, fuel goes in. Now, just looking at that, it would seem as if they are just going to go with 1 Bowser's worth of fuel, whereas the car of John Corbett, they were putting in a second slug of fuel.
Yeah, I think Spider is a slightly heavier car, a little bit more thirsty engine, so I'd imagine the teams would have assessed the fuel left after yesterday's race, so they'll be judging it by that.
Also in his John Caldwell, it throws up the question as well whether or not John Corbett may struggle with a little bit of a fuel issue late on yesterday that was causing him to lose a little bit of the pace that he did. Now Cantillon ducks in as well after just a single lap in clear air as John Corbett rolls down the pit lane and back into the race. So for Mike Cantillon, you can see where he's got to pull to a halt, and slightly surprised he's come in so early actually, because with a clear track and no traffic to contend with, he could have just kept circulating on a low fuel load.
Yeah, certainly. Not sure what he based that decision on. Maybe he just fancied a quick drink and a few minutes to rest.
Although it could be, of course, that they short fueled the car for the first stint to run at a high pace on the fresh tyres.
That's the other thing, yeah, definitely. And obviously they don't want to risk any fuel surge or anything, so better to get the car in and get that serviced and out for the second stage of this race. Yeah,
I still remember the hilarious "unless you were Frank Biela" moment from Le Mans a few years ago, where he missed the pit lane entry at the end of his first stint and the car retired running out of fuel 40 minutes into Le Mans 24 hours.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than running out of fuel. It's got to be one of the worst ways to try from a race, so definitely don't want to risk that one.
It's also one of the best ways to get a P45 from a team manager.
Yeah, certainly. It's not what you want to be doing as an engineer. So I think it'll be interesting seeing the Supersport SR3 class after these pit stops, because as I say, we've had a lot of professional drivers out at the front, and based on the various lengths of pit stops, we should see an exciting second half to this race.
Certainly will do. Now, James Littlejohn will almost certainly stay out until the last possible lap before he comes in to hand over to Tony Wells. Now, with an eye towards the championship here, actually the progress of John Corbett and Mike Cantillon isn't too much of a concern for Littlejohn and Tony Wells. Really, they need to find a way to beat Manhalalos.
Yeah, as you say, it's really is against those two pairings this weekend. So for Littlejohn and Wells, anything they capitalise on will be great. But as we know, Ross Kaiser getting into the number 61 car of Manhalalos. So Ross is a very quick driver, fantastic performance yesterday. So he's going to be keen to get some laps under him. So
just a little bit of a seesaw at the wheel there for John Corbett as he's out of the pit. Stuart Mosley stays out on track, as does Bradley Ellis. Peter Padden also yet to make his pit stop. So Cantillon is released. Now, really the interesting element here is going to be the deficit to John Corbett. There it is now. First of all, that is a lot less than 20 seconds, which suggests that maybe Corbett and Winslow had a slightly slower pit stop.
Yeah, it's hard to tell at this stage, but yeah, hopefully there's no issues whereby Mike has short stopped or anything. I'm sure there'll be any issues there. So yeah, much smaller gap than we're expecting. It's going to be very, very interesting over the next couple of laps to see where those guys are at on lap time.
Meanwhile, Jamie Constable is in and the fuel being pumped into his car. Now, there is a possibility here still of a podium for Jamie Constable despite that big spin over at the Parabolica. The same for Jim Booth. Now, what sort of pace can John Corbett offer us? This is his first flying lap of the stint, and basically, if it is anything much above a 1:50, then this is going to get very interesting in the second half of the race.
Yeah, it certainly isn't. Actually, just as you see now on the screen, that gap very, very close. So Mike's going to have his eyes firmly set on the back of that car. He's driven phenomenally for the first set of this race. So if he can keep his head down, keep consistent, he's got a very, very good chance of taking the title of this race.
Also into the pit lane now is Marcello Marattiotto, and that was my mistake earlier. I was picking up his drive-through penalty for his pit stop to hand over to Cincetti. So now that last lap from John Corbett, a 1:54.1 as his first flyer, so getting himself into the groove. And that for Mike Cantillon we can't really tell because he has his pit stop, and Corbett just struggling a little bit to get the power down as smoothly as he'd like coming out of the Rettifilio. Just a little bit tighter line on the exit.
Yeah, he's on obviously slightly worn tyres, and again this morning they're out on such a wet track, whereas now he's virtually on a complete dry line around the whole track. So got to slightly adjust where he was this morning, get his head in so he can spot those braking zones and know when he can get on the throttle. So I'm sure the next couple of laps he'll get into a bit of a groove, but if he's not careful, very soon he's going to have the spider of Mike Cantillon very close up his tail.
A little bit of a slide from James Littlejohn in the background, and Littlejohn, of course, has got his pit stop to hand over to Tony Wells to come up imminently. So unfortunately our timing screen doesn't give us the static pit times splits, but we're not seeing any as Jim Booth gets his pit stop completed. We're not seeing anything coming up to suggest that Mike Cantillon's pit stop was unduly short. I just wonder, because we saw those two slugs of fuel going into John Corbett, whether that just pushed the pit stop a little bit longer.
Yeah, certainly. And what we've seen from the media coverage we've got, I think all the other spiders probably went at one dump chen. So I think you're right, they must have had an issue with the fuel yesterday and are being maybe slightly overcautious, but may have just cost them that extra 10 seconds to get that fuel in. So see how this develops over the next couple of laps.
For John Corbett, this is a little bit of a voyage into the unknown. He's finding the grip with each and every lap, and it's now allowing Mike Cantillon to close onto his tail and make this really quite tense. Jim Booth, we would expect to emerge behind this battle as Corbett just moves across the inside line. Very preemptive in that.
Yeah, definitely going for that defensive line. I think he would have been watching the beginning of this race and seen that Mike's been very, very strong in this first sector of the race. So he knows exactly where he's at, and a little bit of a slide there from Mike Cantillon. So you can see he's very much pushing and getting the limit of that car. So again, we're going to see the next few laps. This track's still drying out, and the sun's slightly coming through. So they're going to be pushing harder and harder, but he's got to be careful that he doesn't push it too much too soon. So.
Well, exactly. This is the real difficulty here for Mike Cantillon, is that he spun yesterday into the Rettifilio.
Yep.
He came very close to coming a distant second with the concrete wall at the Parabolica early on in the race. To catch the car in front's one thing, but with a solitary dry line, where do you pass? Because there aren't actually that many opportunities.
Yeah, very different. As you say, it's easy when it's an SR8 versus the Spider because they've got the long straight and the power down, but with the two Spiders next to each other, difficult. So just seeing the SR3 of Yanni running wide there. So
good tribute to the Ryder Cup this weekend by going in the bunker from Yanni Herpia, but he is back into the race without any particular drama, as now Cantillon beginning to line up the move on John Corbett. And what he will really try and do is fluster the Australian into maybe making a slightly botched exit of Ascari or the Rettifilio so he can use a straight line speed advantage to challenge. But now here comes Corbett. This is effectively the battle for first position, as James Littlejohn's only just now into the pit lane. Cantillon looks to the inside. He goes very deep to the inside. Can he get the car stopped in time into the Parabolica? It would seem that he can. That's beautifully executed by Cantillon. If it works for him, he picks up the momentum as he swings out of the turn onto the start and finish straight. And well done, Mike Cantillon. That was a very well judged manoeuvre. He scrubbed the speed off perfectly and has leapt up past John Corbett.
Yeah, very brave move, going so tight to the inside line there, and just gave himself enough road to drag out wide without getting onto that curb as you saw him do earlier. So that was a very intelligent pass. It's just showing the sheer pace he's got, the fact that he's caught up with Corbett so quickly. Phenomenal drive from Mike Cantillon today.
He really has got the bit between his teeth, doesn't he? And whatever they put in his espresso this morning, it has clearly worked. Maybe it was just a very large espresso, as they come into the second of the chicanes. Cantillon on the 20th lap. He's still got a third of the race to go, so this is far from settled just yet, because what we don't know is Cantillon running that pace earlier on. Has he pushed the tyres a little bit too hard? Was James Winslow running at that steadier pace for a good reason? Yeah,
Mike's going to have to be careful, say, from his point of view. He needs to pull a little gap for a safety margin and then just try and keep a very consistent pace, just to make sure he gets those laps one after the other. Constable very close to the back of Jim Booth there, just pulls out to the left hand side, and hopefully we'll get that done on the inside line.
Yes, just about. And again, what's interesting is they're now just finding a little bit more grip to the inside line there. Suggests the track is starting to come to them.
Yeah, you see a little bit more confidence from every driver as they come to make those passes, and just means they can predict a little bit more how the car's going to handle and where it's going to go. So yeah, certainly fantastic work there from Jamie, who we saw that error earlier on in the race, has got some ground to make up.
So the race order then is Mike Cantillon leads from John Corbett, then it is Tony Wells in third, there is Tony in fourth, it's Alain Costa, fifth is Jamie Constable, sixth is Jim Booth. Ricardo Dona leads the Supersport class from Brian Caldwell and James Winslow. But solid podium here would suit Tony Wells and James Littlejohn pretty nicely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you said, all they need to do is make sure they're ahead of the Alos and Ross Kaiser pairing, but they should be in good chance today, and just got to keep those consistent laps in. And as you know, Tony, very good driver as well, so if he can just keep that car in front of Alos and Capadia, should be a good result for them today.
Manhal Alos currently in 7th place, although just wondering whether or not is Manhal doing this race single-handedly, or is Ross Kaiser jumping in? It is Manhal single-handedly for this one.
I did see Ross suiting up though at the pit stops. He did have his seat, so unless they've made a last-minute change, the plan was for him to hop in. So we might get to look at the helmet in a minute and work out what they've chosen.
I'm going to go with the car having just done its best lap of the race of a 1 minute 50.3. That it's Ross Kaiser probably behind the wheel.
That would make sense, yeah. So we'll see that bright helmet of Ross Kaiser in a minute, and that will confirm for us.
Meanwhile, we have got Brian Caldwell second in the Supersport class. He's only 6 seconds behind Ricardo Dona, and doing a little bit of bullying of Alain Costa. There is Costa in fourth, and you could just see background there. Jamie Constable in fifth, actually. He's only 6 seconds back, is Jamie. And Jamie Constable, the pace he's currently running at, well, fourth place is definitely on. 18 seconds up the road to Tony Wells. It's an arse, but 2 seconds a lap. It could could be doable for Jamie Constable, so that's worth keeping tabs on. As John Corbett has dropped somewhere back from Mike Cantillon over this last lap.
Yeah, it allows Cantillon just to have that small gap that we were speaking about earlier. So for him now, it's a game. RBC, this is the sole mistake here. So just running wide in the exit, getting out to the gravel. Fortunately, carries enough pace through the gravel to get back to the tarmac and brings it onto the track again. Nerves
are still from our cameraman as well, as he got a spider hurtling towards him.
Yeah, certainly no jumping out the way from him.
So how much time did John Corbett lose? About 5 seconds is the answer. And I have to say that given that Jamie Constable is lapping in a 1 minute 50-second bracket at the moment, Jamie shouldn't be discounted as an outside bet at a podium, or even a little bit better than third, depending on whether or not John Corbett can find that consistency again.
Yeah, it's going to be very important for Corbett to get in a bit of a groove now, because little mistakes like that, one or two more of those, and as you say, he'll have Wells and Constable right up his tail, fighting for that second position.
It's one of those circuits as well that can start to play mind games on you, because you've got so many long straights that you can start to think and worry about your braking point as you come onto each straight, rather than say somewhere like Jerez where we go next, where the corners come so quickly that once you made a mistake, you're just straight back into a succession of corners and getting back to being busy.
Yeah, and it can be a lot easier to get into a rhythm on a circuit like that where you've got all the corners. As I say here, some long straights, which gives you a bit of thinking time, but it's so crucial that they pick those braking zones. And throughout the race, as the cars are getting lighter on fuel, as the track's drying up in this situation, they're going to be pushing those braking points later and later. So again, as we've said a couple of times already, it's about getting that mixture of braking as late as possible, but without overcooking it and risking the position.
Probably going to have a deluge of complaint letters now for referencing the fact that racing drivers think. But nonetheless, Mike Cantillon is very, very comfortable at the head of the field. He's best by the 10 seconds clear now of John Corbett, and this is an absolutely magnificent performance from Cantillon. Up until the unfortunate events that put him out in Paul Ricard, he was going as well as this, and he's now really locked into a groove. Just thinking about putting the lap on Konstantin Gudkaev, thinks much better of it into the Retafilio. He should be able to power past en route to Curva Grande. Konstantin Gudkaev sees him, moves aside, and that is fairly straightforward to execute. John Corbett back into a little bit more of a groove. That last lap, 1 minute 52.2, a second and a half quicker than Tony Wells as a result. And Tony actually being caught quite quickly here by Alain Costa in fourth. Alain 2.5 seconds quicker than Tony Wells last time around. He's 11 seconds back, and Jamie Constable is only 3 seconds back for Alain Costa and 4 seconds of that quicker than Tony.
Yeah, so it's going to be, with just over 15 minutes left on the clock, it's going to be certainly an interesting closing stage to this race, as we've seen in so many of the European Master races this year.
And I think the tantalising prospect here is that once we turn our attention to the next meeting in Jerez, the season finale, that's a track that might just play into the hands of the SR8s a little bit more. And so that's where Tony Wells and James Littlejohn may fancy that they'll be on the top step of the podium again. Yeah, definitely. We've had a streak of sort of big F1 style circuits with the long straights and swooping corners, which has allowed the Spider to perform absolutely fantastically. But we know that the SR8 is slightly more nimble. So yeah, as you say, at Jerez, we should see the SR8s slightly quicker, which is going to be great for the season finale with Wells, Littlejohn, and Alos, and I guess Capedra will be back for that last round of the year, but we'll have to wait and see. Yeah, well, given the reasons why he's not here this weekend, they could quite easily apply in 3 weeks' time for him not to be in Jerez as well. Yeah. So I think this is actually the first probably race all year that we've seen Mike just have a nice clean race and really seen what he can do with that car. As you say, he's had a few unfortunate incidents and very, very close there. Having to be slightly more cautious on the brakes just to avoid that from the slightly less experienced John Caldwell in the SR3 in front. So he'll be pleased to get past that car now and back into some clean space. That was entirely our fault if that had gone wrong, for just suggesting that he was having a clean race. Now, Tony Wells has elevated his pace a little bit to start to peg it to that of John Corbett. The problem is that he is still giving away time to Alain Costa, and he's still giving away plenty of time to Jamie Constable. And in the background there, you can see Constable and Costa into the Retafilio. It's only a matter of time, I'd imagine, before Jamie Constable climbs up into fourth position. Now, the real kicker here for Jamie is he's 34 seconds off the lead. He lost 30 seconds with that spin at the Parabolica.
Yeah, he'll be kicking himself after that. And as we know, Jamie and Mike, very good friends, and they would have loved to have a race here together today. So pulls out Acosta and actually makes that move. Oh no, slightly behind. So yeah, I thought he'd made an easy turn that, but Costa managed to keep the power down and not quite there.
That was impressive from Alain Costa. He knew where he needed to position the car, and he was able to play to the strengths of the SR8. And the challenge here at Monza is because it's a relatively narrow circuit compared to some of the ones that we visit. You're struggling to go side by side in a lot of places. Jamie Constable, though, he's got a little bit of time to play with here, because once he's clear of Costa, he'll be getting onto terms with Tony Wells fairly rapidly.
Yeah, we'll expect to see Jamie doing something here in the closing stage of this lap. He's kept that gap nice and tight, so if he can do something on the last corner into the straight, that will give him that chance to propel forward and catch his next target of Tony Wells.
Mike Cantillon just looks ahead into the Rettifilio, picks his racing line. Shauna Lacey-esque movement of the head from Cantillon. But that's what you want to see the drivers doing, looking well ahead. It means that the actual driving of the car, they're just in the rhythm. It's all about what's next, what to think of.
Yeah, definitely. And for Mike out front there, as you say, he's got in a slight rhythm, so he's just looking far ahead to see what cars are coming up. Obviously, with the slower SR3, he's just making sure that he knows what cars where, so that he can make sure that he overtakes in the right position and causes no hindrance to his race. So, yeah, it's all about, for him, just consistency and bringing that car home in one piece now.
Just a little bit of a kick of the accelerator for Cantillon through the Lesmos. Jamie Constable, by the way, did kind of get past Alain Costa on that last lap. He's now 1.5 seconds clear of the Monegasque. He's only 8 seconds back from Tony Wells, and he's only 15 seconds back from John Corbett, but he's almost 4 seconds lap quicker than John Corbett. So this is very interesting to follow the progress of Jamie Constable.
Yeah, certainly. I guess the team will be on the radio to Jamie, let him know all this information, so he'll know what's ahead of him and what he's got to do. And it's, Jamie, a very, very quick driver. He's just got to avoid making any more of those mistakes as we saw earlier. But hopefully, with the drawing track and some laps under his belt, he should be able to get this job done.
Meanwhile, in the Supersport class, that is led by Ricardo Dona from Brian Caldwell and James Winslow, and those gaps actually fairly stable. They're all lapping at a very similar level of pace in the Supersport class, so not looking hugely likely that we're going to see much of a change amongst the Supersport podium between now and the flag.
Interesting, because obviously yesterday James Winslow lapping almost 2 seconds a lap, I think, quicker than Caldwell at the closing stage of yesterday's race, so not quite the same pace today, maybe down to car setup, as you said, being slightly more controversial, and also he has obviously done the first half of this race in a Spider, which is physically very demanding.
So we've got car number 20, Alain Costa, penalised under regulation 3.8.3 brackets 3, which I know, Josh, you know exactly what that is off the top of your head. There's a problem for John Corbett, and John Corbett pulls off the road, and that is such a pity to see. It's on the run to Ascari, and that is such a shame for John Corbett.
So crucially, he's asking the marshals not to touch the car, so I'm guessing he's trying to go through a reset procedure there. So I wonder whether the car cut out, but it looks now like they are pushing off the circuit. So what a shame for Corbett there, because these guys have had a good race, and maybe that'll explain the slightly slowing pace. Although, I was just trying to see if he was getting it going, but I think he is pulling off.
I don't know if they were just trying to get him onto the asphalt so he could fire it up a little bit more easily. Nonetheless, it promotes Jamie Constable to third, and Jamie Constable now in third place in the 99 car is only 4 seconds back from Tony Wells. Manhal Alos and Ross Kaiser, and we're watching the progress of Ross now, are in 6th position, and Ross might fancy his chances a little bit better than that between now and the flag, particularly as Alain Costa, the penalisation that he's got, I have to say I don't know what that penalty is.
No, I know you were going to ask me that, and I must admit my knowledge doesn't stretch quite that far, so we will find out that one after the race, but not sure whether that's going to be something to do with pit lanes or whether it's something done on track. So,
but all credit to Brian Poulter, the race director, for having those regulations at the tips of his fingers.
Yeah, certainly. It may be, again, I don't know, just making presumptions here, but there is a limit to 2 people to touch the car at a pit stop. So if any third person or additional staff and that have touched the car, that will have been picked up on. So we will find out after the race and let you know later, but that may be the cause of that.
Now, here is the battle for second and third. There is Tony Wells. He's got the orange and white car of Jamie Constable homing in onto his tail as the pair of them run down the start and finish straight, snick down through the paddle shift gears as they jink to the right, then the left at the Rettifilio. Certainly for Tony Wells, there's a shot. And Jamie Constable spun it away, and the tight camera angle on Tony Wells, we didn't see that until we got the wide shot, and what a disaster for Jamie as when he rejoins and clobbers into Jim Booth. And that was a little bit of a misjudgment there, possibly, from Jamie Constable. And so both of them are facing the wrong direction at the Rettifilio. And that is such a pity for both drivers. Constable looks to get back up to speed. He certainly doesn't seem to have done the suspension too much harm. Jim Booth also gets the car restarted and rejoins. So at least they're still back in the race. But any hopes of a podium for Jamie are now long gone. Yeah,
very frustrated Jim Booth there as well, who's had a very consistent, steady race, but unbelievable from Constable. He'll be kicking himself for that. It's, we've seen a couple of mistakes like that from him this year, and like I say, beginning the race and that, he was looking sure set to potentially take that second place in the podium. So, a real shame for him and a real shame for Jim Booth there, as you say, slightly hot under the collar.
Yeah, I'd imagine the case of Prosecco will probably be passing hands at some point before now and the end of the day, as Cantillon picks his way past Yanni Herpia. And it's amazing how fortunes can fluctuate, because yesterday it was Cantillon who had the slightly ragged race and Jamie Constable didn't put a wheel wrong, and today it's a slight role reversal, as in second position now and very secure in second place it's Tony Wells. Third is going to be Alain Costa, pending whatever penalty he's going to have. Now here's the spin from Jamie Constable. It was exactly the same as Cantillon actually yesterday, just the car breaking away from him. And then as Jamie rejoined, I think he just didn't realise that Jim was there and coming in at that speed.
Yeah, unfortunately a fair bit of damage actually on the front left of Jim Booth's car. So rear left. So I'm hoping he's going to be able to finish the race without any complications. Let's say with just 7.5 minutes to go, but he may find that he caused some problem there, because there's a big hit to the rear wheel in that rear bodywork section.
Yeah, I think a big smack for the McDonald SPAC driver would describe it reasonably well. But yeah, hopefully not too much in the way of significant damage for Jim Booth. But I fear it is, because Constable's touring, and Jim was also very slow through the middle sector as well.
Yep, and crucially just there, as you see come on our board, that is now under investigation between car 99 and 63, which is the two spiders of Constable and Jim Booth. So I imagine that'll be looked at probably after the race for a decision of both the drivers up in the race control afterwards. So I don't think Jamie will be too surprised by that after that move.
It's just sometimes one of those things that happen. The level of concentration and the adrenaline that's pumping through, if you make a mistake like that, you just want to get back on the track and get going.
The trouble on that first corner, you're in a very vulnerable position there, because you've got cars hurtling down at 180 miles an hour, slamming the brakes on. So you want to get moving as quick as you can, and often when you spin these cars, they stall. There's a certain reset procedure you need to go through. So it's like stalling running into a roundabout when driving on the road. Not that I ever do that, of course, but no. It's keeping cool, calm and collected and getting the car going as quick as possible. So a slight amateur error there from Jamie Constable, but I know he'll be very apologetic for that one.
Mike Cantillon now into the latter stage of the race. Just 6 minutes remain. Now, with an eye towards the championship here, it's been that sort of year for Tony Wells and James Littlejohn, when they've needed luck to suddenly swing in their favour. It's just happened for them.
Yeah, and I'd say crucially, this is going to help them massively with this good result. As you say, with the instance of those two spiders behind has helped them out certainly, and they've had a great year, and arguably Manhow, there's been a few decisions against him and a few bits of bad luck, so it's the way it goes. But yeah, Little John and Wells looking very strong to take the title this season if they can keep these consistent podium finishes.
For Cantillon, he's only going to have a couple more laps at the end of this one. Into the pits for Jamie Constable, and just a little bit of a check that everything is in line. They'll probably get the car re-squared ahead of the next race in any event. Now, Jim Booth is still circulating, but at a significantly reduced pace. But at the same time, there are still points available here for Jim. And with Alain Costa, we know, picking up a penalty of some description, 4th place might still be the reward for Jim.
Yeah, definitely say if Jamie Constable is not in the fight for this championship, so he's probably coming out precaution there just to make sure he doesn't do any further damage to the car that will inevitably lead to him having any issues with race 3. But for Jim, crucial that he just gets these results under his belt, so he'll be very frustrated with that, but hopefully, as I say, the car will be able to just finish these last couple of laps, bring it home, and allow the guys to get it fixed up ready for race 3.
In the Supersport class, it is Ricardo Dona from Brian Caldwell and James Winslow, as ever was thus, as Alain Costa. There he is in 3rd, and this has been a really good second half of the race for Alain Costa. He seems to have got the car doing what he needs to. Maybe he changed a little bit of the setup during the pit stop, because he's been really flying. He's now matching Tony Wells pretty much 10th for 10th. In fact, a little bit better on that lap for Alain Costa. He's now within 4 seconds of Tony Wells.
Yeah, I think it's been a very up and down season for Costa, but very good driver, particularly thinking the dry weather, which is why he's probably favouring him this second half of this race. So, he's going to have to keep some good laps in, and Tony Wells is very important. He doesn't make any mistakes or errors, because Alain Costa will be straight up there looking for that position.
And of course, this is almost a home race for the Monegasque driver. It's pretty much Monaco, pretty much equidistant between Paul Ricard and Monza.
Yeah, and his car obviously run by the local team, Monza Garage Racing, who are radical dealers for Italy. So very much a home field Grand Prix for him.
Out of the chicane and towards the first of the Lesmos, and then out of there on towards the second one. He is still trying to chase Tony Wells. There's the possibility of something a little bit better than 3rd place possibly on the cards for Alain Costa. Now here is Jim Booth ahead of Mike Cantillon. There you can see the bodywork just hanging slightly loose on the tail of Jim's car. But it shows though that the Spiders are built of stern stuff, because that was a fairly hefty whack that
certainly
he received.
It was definitely, and he would have been travelling at some speed into that too. So fortunately for him, the upright suspensions have lasted, and it's just bodywork damage, which is very easily rectifiable. So although a real shame for Jim, at least it didn't cost him a race finish.
Tony Wells about to take his turn to put the lap onto Yanni Herpier, and Herpier en route to 4th in Supersport class, clear of James Robinson, Marco Cincetti, John Caldwell, Konstantin Gukayev, and Wells sides past now onto the start of the penultimate lap of the race. They're going to be able to squeeze 32 laps out of the 60 minutes, which is pretty good going if you consider they were in the pits for a minute of that as well.
Yeah, certainly. It's a very good pace, very quick circuit, and actually a very difficult circuit for the drivers, say, just because of the huge braking zone. So physically demanding, obviously slightly easier for the guys that are sharing, only doing half stint, but just see there Alain Costa in the background coming up towards the back of Yanni. So
Well, if you think that across the 3 races, the drivers doing single-handed efforts, essentially having 2 Grand Prix worth of action in terms of race time, plus all the practice and qualifying, it is a very physically demanding weekend for them, as Jim Booth just waves Tony Wells past, comes back onto the racing line. Next driver is going to be looking to pass him is Alain Costa, and again Jim sees that Alain's coming, moves right off the racing line.
Yeah, I think Jim knows obviously that he's nursing a slightly injured car, so he's very interested just to get back in one piece, and he doesn't want to implode in anyone's race. And Jim, well-loved guy in the paddock, comes over from America to race, and friendly chap. So everyone respects Jim, and very much from him, he likes to keep everyone on side. So fair racing from him.
And also, just coming up through American racing, there are much more defined rules about the cars going a lap down, really jumping out of the way of the race leaders, than perhaps you sometimes see in Europe. For Mike Cantillon, he is heading into the final lap then, towards the closing stage of the second of 3 races this weekend, the Radical European Masters here in Monza. And this has been a really magnificent performance from Cantillon. He shadowed James Winslow through the first half of the race. Second half of the race, once he was able to get past John Corbett, he's just stretched his legs and romped off into the distance.
Yeah, great drive from Mike. So he's managed to finished this race with a 9.5 second gap, which is very comfortable. He's been consistent. I say, I'm sure we would have seen a similar race yesterday had it not been for that incident on the first corner. So just shows the importance of making every lap count. And Mike's going to be very pleased with his performance. And he'll only be kicking himself that Jamie wasn't there behind him battling for first position.
Acceleration towards the first Lesmo for Cancel on Tony Wells. Second place for him and James Littlejohn. They're going to finish ahead of Manhouse once more. And the Supersport class, not seen an awful lot of it, but Ricardo Dona, who didn't finish the first race of the weekend, great to see him and Stuart Mosley looking fair set for victory, clear of Brian Caldwell and Bradley Ellis, and then James Winslow and Peter Padden en route to third. And there is, in fact, James Winslow just ahead of Cantillon, who arrives into Ascari for the final time. But of course, we will be back later on today for the concluding race. That is due to get underway at 4:50 local time here. Oh, and a problem for Alain Costa on the last lap of the race. That's over at the second chicane, and Costa is off the road and out of the car.
That's unbelievable. I say he's had such bad luck this year, a number of mechanical issues, and he'll be absolutely kicking himself over that one, because a fantastic performance from him today. So real shame for him. Crucially, that moves Alos and Kaiser up into third position, which slightly closes that gap to Tony Wells.
So Mike Cantillon takes the checker flag and win here in Monza. He will be overjoyed with that. It was a superb drive. Second place to Tony Wells and James Littlejohn from pole position, and ample success seconds with Manhal Alos and Ross Kaiser now to complete the podium after a race full of drama. And then Jim Booth, despite that contact with Jamie Constable, is going to claim a very richly deserved fourth place finish. Well, we'll have a fair old pause until he arrives. Look at Cadley, he's delighted.
Yeah, certainly. I think even just watching him on the grid at the start, you could see his eyes were wide open. He's excited for this one. So fantastic race. You can't fault the way he's driven it. Absolutely perfect. And some great overtakes. Very steady, consistent laps. Really, that's the way how you should win a race.
And he pumps the air in delight. Picks his way around towards the Parc Ferme.
And there's the SR8 of Costa is actually back running again, so he's able just to complete. So I'm not sure what that's going to put him down the order, but
I think if he can complete this lap, he is going to hold on to fourth place, because Jim Booth have gone a lap down already. So Alain Costa, if he can find the... I just wonder if he ran out of fuel.
It may very well be that, actually, looking at him driving very slow there. May just be that he's surged on fuel, so he's just bringing it back very slowly to complete the race. But yeah, real shame for him. And if it is fuel, as you say, very frustrating, because a quick drive and very consistent.
Ricardo Dona and Stuart Mosley have won the Supersport class. They've just taken the checker flag. Brian Corbell and Bradley Ellis taking second, and then James Winslow and Peter Padden will complete that Supersport podium in a moment's time. And well, how much drama do you want over a 60-minute race? This is one that has had absolutely everything.
Yeah, it's certainly been full of excitement. Fantastic to see the race starting in slightly damp conditions and drying up. Changes the way the drivers sculpt their race. So yeah, very exciting race. A few people come croppers. Unfortunately, Jamie Constable, not the race it should have been. Jim Booth with that damage. So yeah, plenty to watch, plenty of action, setting us up well for race 3.
So look then at the results. Mike Cantillon wins it from Tony Wells and James Littlejohn. Then Manhouse and Ross Kaiser in third. Alain Costa will be classified in fourth from Jim Booth in fifth. Ricardo Dona and Stuart Mosley win the Supersport class, and sixth overall from Bradley Ellis and Brian Caldwell. Then Peter Padden and James Winslow in 8th to complete the Supersport podium from Yanni Herpier. Then Manchester and Robinson, Maratiotto and Chen Chetil disappointed with 11th, head of John Caldwell and Konstantin Gudkayev. Jamie Constable, of course, we lost after that unfortunate incident with Jim Booth, and also John Corbett, Jeremy Ferguson and Austin Kinsella all failing to make it to the flag. So let's take a look then at the highlights of the race. And off the line, it was James Littlejohn from pole position who got jumped by James Winslow as they went down towards the Rettifilio for the first time. So the front of the field made it through okay. John Caldwell got a little bit caught up in the chain reaction further back, and Marcello Maratiotto and Jack Manchester got a little bit too close for company. Jamie Constable was flying, pushed a little bit too hard to challenge James Littlejohn into the Parabolica, kept his foot in and spun it around, and fortunately was not collected by any of his rivals. Meanwhile, Austin Kinsella and Yanni Herpia are also enjoying a close battle in the early stages. Alan Costa and Manhal Alos going at it wheel to wheel. Costa trying possibly a little bit too hard to pick his way past Manhal, as at the front of the pack, Mike Cantillon, post pit stops, was able to pick his way past John Corbett and take the lead for the final third of the race. Meanwhile, Jamie Constable was pushing very hard on the recovery drive and was looking set for second position until it all went wrong at the Rettifilio. He spun whilst challenging Tony Wells, and then, unfortunately, as he rejoined, it was into the path of Jim Booth, collecting the American and spinning them both down the order and effectively out of contention. So it was a win for Mike Cantillon, and dominantly so, from Tony Wells and James Littlejohn in second place. Manhal Alos and Ross Kaiser to complete the podium, with then victory in the Supersport class for Ricardo Dona and Stuart Mosley. So that is it from Josh Duran and Ben Evans. We will be back later on this afternoon, so join us at about 10 to 5 Central European time for the concluding race for the Radical European Masters here in Monza. Until then, it's goodbye.